Brother, if there's such a thing as an ancient conspiracy theory, it's this. So,
Deep in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, 3 stones, each weighing 800 tons, sit 20 feet in the air, fitted so tightly that a razor blade can't slide between them. Mainstream history tells us the Romans moved these using wooden rollers, ropes, sleds, and massive manpower. But here's the problem. An 800-ton block is heavier than 3 Boeing 747s. Even today's most advanced mega cranes would struggle to lift them. And it doesn't end there. Hidden nearby is a 1,600-ton monster stone that defies everything we know about ancient engineering. So who built this Baalbek Megalithic wall? Why were some gigantic stones left behind just 800 meters away in the quarry suddenly abandoned mid-work? And why is there no clear record of how these stones were ever moved? Let's find out. The official story. It all started in 1751, when 2 British explorers, Robert Wood and James Dawkins, reached this forgotten site. They didn't just pass by, they studied it, drew it, and documented it. When their work was published in 1757, Europe was shaken. People could not believe what they were seeing. Ruins of this scale, this precision, sitting deep inside what was then considered remote land. It didn't fit the image of ancient construction at all. But the real turning point came in 1898. German Emperor Wilhelm II visited Baalbek himself, and what he saw was enough to change the direction of research completely. He was reportedly stunned by the size of the platform and the stones. Right after his visit, he ordered German archaeologists to begin proper scientific excavation. From that moment, Baalbek stopped being a local mystery and became a global archaeological focus. After years of study, experts built a clear explanation, one that is still repeated in textbooks today. According to this official story, the Romans took control of the region after Augustus Caesar's conquest. They transformed Baalbek into a Roman religious center called Heliopolis. Between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, they built massive temples, especially the Temple of Jupiter, which sat on top of a huge supporting platform. And to support this structure, historians say the Romans constructed a giant retaining wall, a U-shaped base made from enormous stones, designed to hold everything in place on a sloping ground. The explanation continues with Roman engineering methods, endless manpower, slave labor, wooden rollers, ropes, pulleys, capstans. If anyone Googles Baalbek today, they'll find this exact same story. But here's the problem. This entire story rests on one assumption, that whatever lies beneath Roman temples must also be Roman. And that single assumption starts to break the moment you stop looking at the columns above and focus on what's underneath them. The Roman structures are held together with mortar and metal clamps, but the foundation below is completely different. The stones are so tightly fitted that there is no space between them at all. No mortar, no filler, nothing. It feels like 2 entirely different building methods, separated not just by technique, but possibly by time itself. But that's not all. There are 3 major cracks in this standard explanation, and once you see them, the whole story starts to fall apart. Let's start with the biggest problem, the trilithon mystery. Built into the western retaining wall of the Temple of Jupiter are 3 massive stones known as the trilithon. The Roman columns above them have cracked, collapsed, and fallen over time. But these stones, they haven't moved even an inch. For thousands of years, they have stayed exactly where they were placed, and they are not even at ground level. These 3 stones sit about 23 feet, nearly 7 meters above the ground. Beneath them is another layer of blocks, each weighing around 350 tons. As if that wasn't enough, someone lifted even larger stones on top of those. Each of the trilithon blocks is around 64 feet long, 14 feet high, and 12 feet deep. Each one weighs close to 800 tons. That is about 1.6 million pounds. To understand that weight, you have to compare it. One single stone weighs as much as 3 fully loaded Boeing 747 airplanes. The heaviest stones inside the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh about 80 tons. These are 10 times heavier. But the real shock is not just the size, it is the precision. There is no mortar between these stones, no cement, no mud, no glue. They are held together by nothing but their own weight. The surfaces are cut so perfectly flat that the entire weight spreads evenly across them. Engineers call it super friction, but even that word feels too small. People have tested it. Archaeologists have tried for years to find even the smallest gap. You cannot slide a piece of paper between them, not even a razor blade. 3 stones, each weighing 800 tons, sitting perfectly flush, like they were placed by a machine that doesn't make mistakes. And then comes the alignment. To lift stones of this size and place them 23 feet high, perfectly level, perfectly squared, requires extreme synchronization. If even one stone was off by a tiny fraction, even half a degree, the entire wall would show it. But it doesn't. There are no visible errors. Now compare that to modern engineering. Most cranes today lift between 10 to 50 tons. To lift 800 tons, you need a mega crane, something like the Liebherr LR 13000. A machine that costs tens of millions of dollars and requires fleets of trucks just to transport its parts. And yet, we are told ancient builders did something similar. Using ropes, wooden logs, and manpower. And it doesn't stop even there. Some engineers believe these stones were not just placed, they were finished after being placed. Final shaping, shaving the surfaces to perfection while already sitting in the wall. Imagine the amount of stone dust that would create, enough to bury entire sections of land. There is no clear evidence of that process either. But here is where it gets even more disturbing. As impossible as the trilithon seems, these are not the biggest stones at Baalbek, because just a short distance away, in a nearby quarry, is something that makes the trilithon look like a warm-up act. The unfinished giants. Just about 800 meters from the temple, the story takes a turn that is hard to ignore. This is the Hajar al-Hibla quarry, the place where these massive stones were cut from the earth itself. And this is where the mystery stops being impressive and starts becoming difficult to explain. For centuries, one stone here held the record. It is called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It weighs around 1,000 tons. In 2014, archaeologists digging beneath it uncovered something even more shocking. Another block, weighing around 1,650 tons, more than double the weight of the trilithon. It stands as the largest carved stone ever discovered on Earth. And here is the part that makes no sense. These stones are not rough. They are not half-cut. They are shaped, squared, and finished with sharp, clean edges. It looks like a project that was almost complete, like workers stepped away for a short break. The quarry is not level with the temple, which means these stones were not meant to be dragged downhill. They had to be moved uphill, over a slope, against gravity, with a weight that presses down with unimaginable force. The common explanation talks about wooden rollers. That idea begins to fall apart. A 1,000-ton block would crush wood instantly. Even the ground itself becomes a problem. To move something like this, you would need a surface harder than modern concrete, and there is no clear evidence of such a system. Now, think about the numbers. If it takes around 40,000 men to move an 800-ton stone, then moving this would require nearly 80,000 people. And even that doesn't solve the real issue. Standing next to this stone, people look like insects. It doesn't feel like a building block. It feels like a piece of the earth that was never meant to be moved. But the story doesn't end even there. Once you step back and look at the entire site, the mystery is no longer just about size or weight. It starts pointing towards something deeper, with a level of understanding we are only beginning to notice. The hidden intelligence. This entire platform is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. That alone is not easy, especially without modern instruments. But it goes further. The layout of the site is also aligned with the Pleiades star cluster, a group of stars that ancient cultures across the world saw as the beginning of time. Is that this alignment would have been most accurate thousands of years before the Romans ever arrived. Then there is the sun. During the summer and winter solstices, sunlight hits the massive foundation stones at very specific angles. The shadows that form are not random. They fall in patterns that can be used as a calendar. That kind of accuracy doesn't come from guesswork. It comes from long-term observation. There is something even harder to explain: the sound. Engineers studying the site have noticed that the limestone used here contains a high amount of quartz. It can generate small electrical signals. Now combine that with what lies beneath the platform. Then there is the geometry. They often match what is known as the golden ratio, a pattern found in nature, in galaxies, a simple but powerful method to create perfect right angles. Doing that across such massive distances, with stones weighing hundreds of tons, so now the problem is no longer just about lifting heavy stones. It is about knowledge. And when you put all of this together, the official story starts to feel incomplete. Because this is no longer just Roman engineering, it is something far more complex. And that realization has forced researchers to take a second look, to update the story itself. The new archaeological twist. When scientists stopped looking at Baalbek as a story and started studying it layer by layer, the ground itself began to give answers. At the top, you have the Roman construction. Below that, there are traces linked to earlier Phoenician activity. But then comes the bottom layer, the massive megalithic foundation. It follows a completely different style, a different method, almost as if it were built in a different age altogether. Because the Romans were known for reusing sacred places, and modern surveys suggest something very simple, but very powerful. When the Romans arrived here, the platform was already there. But the strongest evidence doesn't come from history, it comes from geology. If you look closely at the Roman columns, you see sharp edges, but the massive stones beneath them tell a different story. Because that kind of water erosion doesn't happen quickly. It requires thousands of years of heavy, consistent rainfall. But the Bekaa Valley hasn't had that kind of climate for around 10,000 to 12,000 years, which means those stones were already exposed to rain. Then came the next discovery. Using ground-penetrating radar and seismic imaging, researchers scanned beneath the Temple of Jupiter. What they found baffled everyone. Deep below the visible platform, there are empty spaces. It suggests that what we see on the surface is only part of something much larger. Thermal imaging has shown that the megalithic stones hold heat longer than the Roman stones around them. Some researchers have even suggested that the surface of these stones may have been treated, almost fused, a process far beyond what we know the Romans could do. Even modern archaeological groups have started to adjust their position. The German Archaeological Institute, after studying the quarry and the massive unfinished stones, admitted that these phases of construction don't easily fit within Roman capabilities. If the Romans didn't build this, then who did? The forbidden explanations. Across almost every culture that passed through this region, the same idea kept appearing. In Arabic tradition, the site was known as Darat el-Amalika. Some older Eastern traditions say the city was built by Cain, using a race of giants who later vanished in a catastrophic flood. Humans alone could not have done this. Even the name Baalbek carries that weight. Long before the Romans arrived, this was a sacred center for Baal, a storm god said to ride the clouds. Ancient texts describe his dwelling as being built from stones so massive that the earth itself could not shake them. Then there is the story of Solomon. In both Jewish and Islamic traditions, Solomon is linked to Baalbek. The legend says he commanded jinns, unseen beings, to transport these stones and build great structures. Now, whether or not someone believes that, the idea behind it is clear. Some researchers connect this to a much older idea. During a period known as the Younger Dryas, a global catastrophe may have wiped out an advanced civilization. Of course, critics reject all of this. They say these are just exaggerations, poetic ways of explaining hard labor and human effort. If this were all just manpower and simple tools, where are the remains of that effort? Why is the physical evidence so quiet, while the stories are so loud? And that's where the mystery begins to stretch beyond one place. Because Baalbek is not alone, as if they are all pointing towards something much larger. The global pattern. When you look at Baalbek, you aren't just looking at Lebanon, huge blocks, irregular shapes, fitted together like a puzzle. No mortar, and so strong that they have survived powerful earthquakes for centuries. In Egypt, near the Sphinx, there is the Valley Temple. Massive limestone blocks, carefully placed and then covered with granite. And then there is Stonehenge, a structure aligned with the sky, tracking the movement of the sun, different continents, different cultures, but the same behavior. Across all these sites, the precision is almost identical. There is no room for error. It is as if they were all following the same standard. The mathematics is the same too. And the purpose, it always points upward. These sites are not just placed on Earth, they are aligned with the sky. From the pyramids reflecting the stars of Orion, to Baalbek tracking the Pleiades, it feels like they were building a connection between the ground and the heavens. So what does that mean? Like pieces of a system that once existed as a whole. Even the unfinished work tells the same story. The massive stone left in Baalbek's quarry and the unfinished obelisk in Egypt. Both abandoned mid-process, as if something suddenly stopped the work everywhere at once. Almost like a system that shut down. And that leads to a bigger question. Was there once a time when this knowledge was shared across the world? Some researchers point to a moment in history around 11,600 years ago. A period of sudden climate change, massive floods, and global disruption. A kind of reset that could have erased an advanced civilization almost overnight, leaving behind only fragments that later generations tried to understand. And maybe that is what we are looking at. Not the beginning of human knowledge, but the remains of something that came before it. So, here we are. The Romans built their temples on the Baalbek stones to feel powerful. We study them to feel smart. But the stones themselves remain silent, holding a secret that might be too heavy for us to carry. Because if a civilization capable of moving 1,600-ton Baalbek stones could vanish without a trace, what does that say about us? And if there truly was a global system that built the impossible, what made it disappear so completely that today we call it a myth? Let me know what you think about all this in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Also, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. because we'll be uploading more crazy stories like this very soon. Until next time, see you in the next video.